Don has been the director of the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research in Sydney since 1988.
I'm not dead yet.
And he's also an adjunct professor with the School of Social Science and Policy at the University of New South Wales. He's published on such a wide range of topics that it's hard to do justice to them, but certainly some of them include drug law enforcement policy, liquor licensing enforcement, criminal justice administration, juvenile recidivism and crime prevention. He's got 3 books, the most recent, Arresting Incarceration, Pathways Out of Indigenous Imprisonment. I think it would be fair to say Don has been keeping governments honest about the facts and informing the media for years. Can we please welcome Dr. Don Weatherburn?
I can't tell you how frustrating it is to be up here watching you all have a quiet drink and relax. Somehow or other it just doesn't seem fair. So I'm going to talk pretty briefly about our results, but I just want to begin by acknowledging my co-authors, particularly Patricia Menendez, who's not with us now. Don't worry, she hasn't died yet. She's gone to Queensland. It's sort of like dying. Sorry. But Patricia did the analysis that I'm going to report. She's a wonderful person. It's great to have her in the Bureau, and I'm sorry we couldn't keep her for longer. Also, Kipros Kipri from the University of Newcastle and myself. So the background I don't really need to go into because Julia's so eloquently already given you the background to it. But for those of you who weren't listening closely, this set of laws that we're talking about today really began with the murder or killing of Daniel Christie in a one-punch assault in King's Cross on New Year's Eve. Straight after that, on the 21st of January in 2014, Premier Barry O'Farrell at the time introduced new restrictions on what's called the King's Cross and Sydney CBD entertainment districts, quite well-defined districts I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. And the lockout package consisted of a wide range of measures, but the key elements, I think, from a public policy perspective, was the 1:30am lockout, the 3am cessation of alcohol service, the freeze on new liquor licences, the ban on takeaway alcohol sales after 10pm, which was the only part of the package that applied across the state as a whole, and the extension of orders banning troublemakers from licensed premises in those districts. So the questions we wanted to answer are quite straightforward. Did the 2014 reforms reduce the incidence of assault in King's Cross and the CBD? Was there or is there any evidence of displacement to areas nearby or within easy reach of those 2 areas? If there was displacement, is the reduction in assaults in King's Cross and the Sydney CBD larger than the displacement? In other words, was there a net reduction in assault, or did we just simply shift the problem from one location to another? And lastly, did the reduction in violence coincide with the timing of the restrictions on the sale of alcohol, so the 1:30am and lockout and the 3am closure? Just tell me if I'm going too quickly for you. I won't spend a lot of time on past research, but when I come back to interpret the results, there are a few things I want to draw your attention to. So it's worth noting there's been previous research on what happens when you relax trading hours for licensed premises. Secrecies in Stockwell in 2002 and in 2009 had a look in Western Australia at the liberalisation of liquor trading hours there and found substantial increases in assault where the laws were softened and no change in areas where no change in the law occurred. It's also worth noting that there are a number of other studies that have found assault frequency decreases when trading hours are reduced. Amongst the studies I've listed there, the one that's drawn most attention is the study by Kipros Kipri in Newcastle, the so-called Newcastle lockout. Now, don't think by mentioning these studies I'm trying to roll the dice one way or another. It's just important to know that what we're going to report tonight is part of a larger picture of research that's been going on in this area for some time. So the problem with our initial evaluations, those of you who realise we put one out last year, which looked at the first 8 months after the lockout laws took effect, is precisely that. We only had the 8 months worth of follow-up. So the purpose of the current study was to extend the follow-up period from 8 to 16 months, which in effect gives us 78 months of pre-intervention with 16 months worth of follow-up. And we also, this time round, had a look at changes in the temporal distribution of assaults in 3 time periods, the 6am to 1:29am, 1:30am, which is the start of the lockout, through to 2:59, and then 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. when hopefully you're all tucked away in bed sound asleep. That was a joke. All my jokes fall flat. So what we're expecting to see, maybe you need to drink more alcohol. What we're expecting to see is changes in that second and third time period, but not necessarily in the first. That's if the changing to liquor licensing trading hours actually is the key mechanism generating the reduction in assault. So the strategy is to compare trends in assault in King's Cross and the Sydney CBD entertainment precincts. And by the way, we're looking at all assaults. We're not just looking at alcohol-related assaults. Some of you may know that alcohol relates are deemed such just by the attending police. There's no great reliability attached to it, so we look at all of the assaults. So we compare the trends in those two target areas with the trends in the trends in assault in 3 areas where the restrictions don't apply, or most of them don't apply, in areas adjacent to King's Cross and the CBD entertainment precincts, and I'm going to show you on a map in a minute to show exactly where they are. Trends in assault to what we call those, by the way, the proximal displacement areas. Trends also in assaults in areas to which drinkers might go if they couldn't get a drink or didn't want to drink in areas proximate to the CBD or King's Cross, Newtown, Double Bay, Bondi Beach and Coogee. We picked those areas in particular because prior to the lockout laws, they are all areas with high rates of alcohol-related violence. And lastly, we're also interested in how the trends in King's Cross and the CBD compare to the trends in New South Wales as a whole, minus the proximal displacement area, the PDA, and the DDA, the distal displacement area. Is that okay? Is everybody cool with that? All clear? You'll be examined later, so I hope you... So here's the map. Now I'm colourblind and I had to get them to change these colours so I could see them, but even so I could still stuff up. So is there a red patch there in King's Cross? Is that red? Okay, so that's the King's Cross entertainment precinct. It's quite small. The blue one, I assume it's blue, is the Sydney CBD entertainment precinct, so that's much larger, has much higher numbers of assaults. That yellow bit, that ring around the Pyrmont, Ultimo, Surrey Hills, and on the other side of that, that's the proximal displacement area. And the distal displacement areas are Newtown, I don't know what colour it is, Coogee, Bondi Beach, and Double Bay. Does that give you a good, clear picture of what we're looking at here? Okay. So what's our method? This is the bit where, you know, I wish Patricia was here, but I'll just sort of pretend I know what I'm talking about. She analysed the data using what are called time series structural models. These basically separate the time series for assault out into its individual components. So the trend, you're talking about the trend, the seasonal component, and any random component. The thing that I've never managed to get my head around is that these techniques allow for varying slope and intercept, but hopefully nobody will ask me any complicated questions about that I can't answer. But the crucial thing, and you're going to see this graphically, is that these techniques allow you to extract the signal from all the noise that's going on. If I just showed you the raw data, in fact I'm going to shortly, you'll see just how hard it is to work out what's going on without these sorts of analyses. So we assume this is for the benefits of people like Kevin Schneepel. They follow a Poisson process, Kevin, you'll be happy with that, but we'll check that later on in the process. And the models essentially, these are just equations that are fitted to the data, and there's a term in the equation which is designed to capture the effect of the intervention, and what we're interested in is whether that term is statistically significant, but we've also got terms in the models capturing any pre-existing trend, the seasonal variation, and any error variation. So that's the raw data. So up the top, that's King's Cross precinct over the years, and that vertical line you're looking at is the point where the lockout came. It's always good just to have a look at the raw data first, and you can see things are bouncing around. Notice, by the way, the large variation until you hit the point where the lockout occurs, and you see a fairly sharp drop away. Same for the CBD, almost a step change for the CBD on the top right-hand panel. The DDA, that's the distal displacement area, nothing really seems to be happening here. It's a bit lower just before the lockout, but there's no discernible trend. And the same is true for the proximal displacement area. Looking at the rest of New South Wales, you can see that steady but bumpy downward trend that's been going on since 2008. So that's what the data looked like. We'll just cut straight to the chase. So that smooth blue line there is the fitted predicted value for the assault series for King's Cross, and you can see it's moving around, get to the point where the intervention takes place and it drops away quite sharply. You want to look at that for a little while? You happy with that? Okay, so here's the situation for the CBD. That's the fitted trend, a linear decline over time up to the point where the intervention takes place, and then a steep drop off. By the way, this is how the Premier or his advisors made the mistake of just computing the percentage change before and after, and you can see there's already a pre-existing downward trend, and you don't want to credit the lockout laws with producing that. It happened before the lockout laws. So here's the overall results. Don't panic. Down the left-hand side, you've got King's Cross Precinct, CBD, proximal displacement area, distal displacement area, and the rest of New South Wales. That column called beta is basically the coefficient measuring the impact of the intervention. If it's negative, it means the assault rate went down. If it's positive, it means it went up. And if you look at the next column, P, the only things you're going to be concerned about are things with a p-value of less than 0.05. So the first point to note about the table is have a look at the PDA and the DDA rows. You'll see that none of them are statistically significant. So there was no change up or down in assault in those proximal or distal displacement areas. But there was a significant change in King's Cross, CBD and the rest of New South Wales. So you can see that from the p-values. If you jump across to the far right-hand column, that tells you, Kevin, I've put the box Young statistics there for you, because I know you want to know there's no autocorrelation in the errors. That was another joke that fell flat. So you can see there's a 45% drop in assault in King's Cross attributable to the intervention, 20% drop in the CBD, and a significant but small drop in the rest of New South Wales, 1.4%. That's a bit less than we saw in the initial evaluation, where we had about a 9% drop for the state as a whole. Is everybody okay with that? So moving on now to the weekday results. Now the 1, 2, 3 refers to the 3 time periods. Just to remind you, 6 p.m. Is time period 1 is 6 p.m. to 1:29 p.m. Time period 2 is 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. or 2:59, and time period 3 is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So the first thing to do is to clear away the rubble. If you look at the PDA 1, 2 and 3 and the DDA 1, 2 and 3, you'll see there's no change at all. So there's no change in any of the time periods for the proximal or distal displacement areas. If you go to the top, the highlighted one there, you'll see there's a significant reduction in assault, 59.2% reduction in assault in King's Cross in the period 6 p.m. to 1:29 p.m. That's before the lockout takes effect and before the restrictions, the closing of business takes effect. No change in the second time period, and a substantial change, very substantial change in the third time period. That's the 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Period. You can see it's come down by about 94%. In the CBD, things go kind of more like you would expect, given what I said earlier. No change in assault prior to the lockout time, but significant change in the second time period. That's the 1:30 a.m. lockout, and a bigger change still in the 3 a.m. Lockout. So 47.3% down in the second time period and 57.1% down in the third time period. Am I going too fast? All good? Okay. So here's the weekend results. You can ignore the bottom half of the table again. Nothing going on in the displacement areas. So at the top, I'll just cut straight to the chase here. Looking at the change, you've got a 54% drop in assaults attributable to the intervention in the first time period, 70% drop in the second time period, and a 76% drop in the third time period for King's Cross. Once again, the CBD kind of makes more sense. There's no change prior to the lockout, but there are 2 big changes in the first and second time periods of the lockout and then the closure, 30.7 and 41.5. I mean, the fact, just to foreshadow one of the things I'm going to bring up shortly, the fact that you're getting these reductions outside the lockout time in King's Cross may suggest to you that there are many fewer people going to King's Cross rather than that people are going but drinking less. But I'll come back to that issue. So these were the questions I started with. The answer to the questions, for those of you who hate graphs, is that yes, they did decline. No, there wasn't any evidence of displacement. Of course, there was a net drop in assault, and you got the mixed results for the actual times. Well, that was going to be the end Oh no, conclusion. The crucial point here is that assault did fall, but it's important to note that we don't know the mechanism. So it's possible people stayed and drank less, particularly in the CBD. It's possible people simply stopped going to King's Cross or the CBD. There's certainly abundant evidence that fewer people are going to King's Cross. I'm not so sure about the CBD. But even if we admit that the lockout laws were responsible, we don't know what element generated the effect. It could have been the lockout, earlier closing, or orders banning troublemakers, adverse publicity. But, and this is where the previous research comes in, the weight of previous research suggests that it's the trading hours that do the work of changing the assault levels. So that's the end, the way I'd organised it, but then I realised everyone's going to ask me about Newtown and Pyrmont, right? Right? Yes, Don. So here's Newtown and Pyrmont. I just did, how many of you live in Newtown? Oh, I knew it. So these are moving averages because the numbers just jump around too much. So is it blue? Top line anyway. You can see the situation for Newtown. The numbers jump around quite a bit, and you know, when people experience those sorts of spikes that you're seeing, it's quite easy for people to imagine that they're seeing an upward trend. In fact, there's no systematic trend, no statistically significant trend over that entire time period in Newtown. The second line underneath it, the dotted line, is Pyrmont, and you can see from what looks like about 2013, what looks like an upward trend. There is a statistically significant upward trend there, but notice that it begins well before the lockout takes place. So how much of that's attributable to the lockout and how much of it's a pre-existing trend is hard to say. So that really is the end for me. Thank you.